Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Insurgent Mexico. We will be jumping into chapter 4 today. La Tropa on the March. So let's get into this. And so I got inside the coach with Rafaelito, Pablo Saifiez, and his mistress. She was a strange creature, young, slender, and beautiful. She was poison and a stone to everybody but Pablo. I never saw her smile and never heard her say a gentle word. Sometimes she treated us with dull ferocity, sometimes with bestial indifference. But Pablo she cradled like a baby. When he lay across the seat with his head in her lap, she would hug it fiercely to her breast, making noises like a tigress with her young. Patricio handed down his guitar from the box where he kept it, and to Raphael's accompaniment, the lieutenant colonel sang love ballads in a cracked voice. Every Mexican knows hundreds of these. They are not written down, but often exposed extemporaneously and handed along by word of mouth. Some of them are very beautiful, some grotesque, and others as satirical as any French popular song. He sang, "Exiled I wandered through the world, exiled by the government. I came back at the end of the year, drawn by the fondness of love. I went away with the purpose of staying away forever, and the love of a woman was the only thing that made me come back. And then, los hijos de la noche. I am the children of the night who wander aimlessly in the darkness. The beautiful moon with its golden rays is the companion of my sorrows. I am going to lose myself from thee, exhausted with weeping. I am going sailing by the shores of the sea. You will see at the time of our parting, I will not allow you to love another. For if so it should be, I would ruin your face, and many blows we would give one another. So I am going to become an American. Go with God, Antonia. Say farewell to my friends. Oh, may the Americans allow me to pace and open a saloon on the other side of the river." The hacienda of El Centro turned out to give us a lunch, and there Fidencio offered me his horse to ride for the afternoon. The Tropa had already ridden on ahead, and I could see them strung out for half a mile in the black mesquite brush. The tiny red and white and green flag bobbing at their head. The mountains had withdrawn somewhere beyond the horizon, and we rode in the midst of a great bowl of desert, rolling up at the edges to meet the furnace blue of the Mexican sky. Now that I was out of the coach, a great silence and peace beyond anything I ever felt wrapped me around. It is almost impossible to get objective about the desert. You sink into it, become a part of it. Galloping along, I soon caught up with the Tropa. "Hey, meester," they shouted. "Here comes meester on a horse. Que tal, meester? How goes it? Are you going to fight with us?" But Captain Fernando at the head of the column turned and roared, "Come here, mister." The big man was grinning with delight. "You shall ride with me," he shouted, clapping me on the back. "Drink now," and he produced a bottle of sotol about half full. "Drink it all. Show you're a man." "It's too much," I laughed. "Drink it," yelled the chorus of the Tropa crowded up to see. I drank it. A howl of laughter and applause went up. Fernando leaned over and gripped my hand. "Good for you, compañero," he bellowed, rolling with mirth. The men crowded around, amused and interested. Was I going to fight with them? Where did I come from? What was I doing? Most of them had never heard of reporters, and we hazarded the opinion darkly that I was a gringo or a porfirista and ought to be shot. The rest, however, were entirely opposed to this view. No porfirista would possibly drink that much sotol in a gulp. Isidoro Amayo declared that he had been in a brigade in the first revolution, which was accompanied by a reporter, and that he was called Corresponsal de Guerra. Did I like Mexico? I said. I'm very fond of Mexico. I like Mexicans too. And I like sotol, aguardiente, mezcal, tequila, pulque, and other Mexican customs. They shouted with laughter. Captain Fernando leaned over and patted my arm. "Now you are with the men, los hombres. When we win the revolution, it will be a government by the men, not the rich. We are riding over the lands of the men. They used to belong to the rich, but now they belong to me and the compañeros." "And you will be the army?" I asked. "When the revolution is won," was the astonishing reply, "there will be no more army. The men are sick of armies. It is by armies that Don Porfirio robbed us." "But if the United States should invade Mexico?" A perfect storm broke everywhere. "We are more valiant than the Americanos. The cursed gringos would never get no further south than Juarez. Let's see them try. We drive them back over the border on the run and burn their capital the next day." "No," said Fernando. "You have more money and more soldiers. But the men would protect us. We need no army. The men would be fighting for the houses and their women." "What are you fighting for?" I asked. Juan Sanchez, the color bearer, looked at me curiously. "Why, it is good, fighting. You don't have to work in the mines." Manuel Paredes said, "We are fighting to restore Francisco I. Madero to the presidency." This extraordinary statement is printed in the program of the revolution, and everywhere the constitutionalist soldiers are known as Maderistas. "I knew him," continued Manuel slowly. "He was always laughing. Always." Yes, said another. Whenever there was any trouble with a man and all the rest wanted to fight him or put him in prison, Pancho Madero said, "Just let me talk to him a few minutes. I can bring him around." He loved bailes, an Indian said. "Many a time I've seen him dance all night, and all the next day, and the next night. He used to come to the great haciendas and make speeches. When he began, the peons hated him. When he ended, they were crying. When a man broke out into a droning irregular tune, such as always accompanies the popular ballads that spring up in thousands on every occasion. In 1910, Madero was imprisoned in the National Palace the 18th of February. 4 days he was imprisoned in the Hall of Intendancy because he did not wish to renounce the presidency. Then Blanque and Felix Diaz martyred him there. They were the hangman feeding on his hate. They crushed until he fainted with play of cruelty to make him resign. Then with hot irons they burned him without mercy, and only unconsciousness calmed the awful flames. But it was all in vain, because his mighty courage preferred rather to die. His was a great heart. This was the end of the life of him who was the Redeemer of the Indian Republic and all the poor. They took him out of the palace and tell us he was killed in an assault. What a cynicism! What a shameless lie! O street of Lecumberri, your cheerfulness has ended forever. For through you passed Madero to the penitentiary. That 22nd of February will always be remembered in the Indian Republic. God has pardoned him and the Virgin of Guadalupe. Goodbye, beautiful Mexico, where our leader died. Goodbye to the palace whence he issued a living corpse. Senores, there is nothing eternal, nor anything sincere in life. See what happened to Don Francisco I. Madero. By the time he was halfway through, the entire Tropa was humming the tune, and when he finished, there was a moment of jingling silence. "We are fighting," said Isidro Amayo, "for libertad." "What do you mean by libertad?" "Libertad is when I can do what I want." "But suppose it hurts somebody else?" He shot back at me Benito Juarez's great silence. Peace is the respect for the rights of others. I wasn't prepared for that. It startled me, this barefooted mestizo's conception of liberty. I submit that it is the only correct definition of liberty, to do what I want to. Americans quote it to me triumphantly as an instance of Mexican irresponsibility. But I think it is a better definition than ours. Liberty has to do with the right to do what the courts won't. Every Mexican schoolboy knows the definition of peace and seems to understand pretty well what it means too. But they say Mexicans don't want peace. That is a lie, and a foolish one. Let Americans take the trouble to go through the Maderista army, asking whether they want peace or not. The people are sick of war. They just want to be square. But just to be square. I'll have to report Juan Sanchez's remark. Is there war in the United States now? He asked. No, I said untruthfully. No war at all. He meditated for a moment. How do you pass your time then? Just about then, somebody saw a coyote sneaking through the brush, and the entire Tropa gave chase with a whoop. They scattered, rollicking over the desert, the late sun flashing from cartridge belts and spurs, the ends of their bright serapes flying out behind. Beyond them, the scorched world sloped gently up, and the range of far lilac mountains jumped in the heat waves like a bucking horse. By here, if tradition is right, past the steel-armored Spaniards in their search for gold, a blaze of crimson and silver that has left the desert cold and dull ever since, and topping a rise, we came upon the first sight of the hacienda of La Mimbrera, a walled enclosure of houses strong enough to stand a siege, stretching steeply down a hill with the magnificent Casa Grande at the top. In front of this house, which had been sacked and burned by Orozco's general, Cheche Campa, 2 years before, the coach was drawn up. A huge fire had been kindled, and 10 compañeros were slaughtering sheep. In the red glare of the firelight, they staggered with the struggling, squealing sheep in their arms, its blood fountaining upon the ground, shining in the fierce light like something phosphorescent. The officers and I dined in the house of the administrador Don Jesus, the most beautiful specimen of manhood I have ever seen. He was much over 6 feet tall, slender, white-skinned, a pure Spanish type of the highest breed. At one end of his dining room, I remember, hung a placard embroidered in red, white, and green, "Viva Mexico!" and at the other a second which read, "Viva Jesus!" It was after dinner, as I stood at the fire wondering where I was to sleep, that Captain Fernando touched me on the arm. "Will you sleep with the compañeros?" We walked across the great open square in the furious light of the desert stars to a stone storehouse set apart. Inside, a few candles stuck against the wall, illuminated with rifles stacked in the corners and saddles on the floor, and the blanket-robed compañeros with their heads on them. 1 or 2 were awake, talking and smoking. In a corner, 3 sat muffled in their serapes playing cards. 5 or 6 had voices and a guitar. They were singing Pascual Orozco, beginning, "They say that Pascual Orozco has turned his coat because Don Terrazas seduced him. They gave him many millions, and they bought him and sent him to overthrow the government." Orozco believed it, and to the war he went. But the Maderista cannon was his calamity. If to thy window shall come Porfirio Diaz, give him for charity some cold tortillas. If to thy window shall come General Huerta, spit in his face and slam the door. If to thy window shall come Inez Salazar, lock your trunk so that he can't steal. If to thy window shall come Maclovio Herrera, give him dinner and put the cloth on the table. They didn't distinguish me at first, but soon as the card player said, "Here comes Meester," at that the others roused and woke the rest. That's right, it's good to sleep with the hombres. Take this place, amigo. Here's my saddle. Here there is no crookedness. Here a man goes straight. May you pass a happy night, compañero. They said, "Till morning, then." Pretty soon somebody shut the door. The room became full of smoke and fetid with human breath. What little silence was left from the chorus of snoring was entirely obliterated by the singing, which kept up, I guess, until dawn. The compañeros had fleas. But I rolled up in my blankets and lay down upon the concrete floor very happily, and I slept better than I had before in Mexico. At dawn we were in the saddle, larking up a steep hill of barren desert to get warm. It was bitter cold. The Tropa were wrapped in serapes up to their eyes, so that they looked like colored toadstools under the great sombreros. The level rays of the sun, burning as they fell upon my face, caught them unaware, glorifying the serapes to more brilliant colors than they possessed. Isidro Amayo's was of deep blue and yellow spirals. Juan Sanchez had one brick red. Captain Fernando's was green and cerise. Against them flashed a purple and black zigzag pattern. We looked back to see the coach pulled up to a stop and Patricio waving to us. Two of the mules had given out, raw from the traces and tottering with the fatigue of the last 2 days. The Tropa scattered to look for mules. They soon came back, driving 2 great, beautiful animals that had never seen harness. No sooner than they had smelled the coach than they made a desperate break for freedom. And now the Tropa instantly went back to their native profession. They became vaqueros. It was a pretty sight, and rope coils swinging in the air, the sudden snake-like shoot of the loops, and the little horses bracing themselves against the shock of the running mule. Those mules were demons. Time after time they broke the riatas. Twice they overturned horse and rider. Pablo came to the rescue. He got on Saba's horse, drove in the spurs, and went after one mule. In 3 minutes he had roped him by the leg, thrown him, and tied him. Then he took the second with equal dispatch. It was not for nothing that Pablo was lieutenant colonel at 26. Not only could he fight better than his men, he could also ride better, rope better, shoot better, chop wood better, and dance better. The mules' legs were tied, and they were dragged with ropes to the coach, where the harness was slipped on them in spite of their frantic struggles. When all was ready, Patricio got on the box, seized the whip, and told us to cut away. The wild animals scrambled to their feet, bucking and squilling. Above the uproar came the crack of the heavy whip, and Patricio's bellow, "Andale, hijos de la gran," and they jerked forward, running, the big coach taking the arroyos like an express train. Soon it vanished behind its own pall of dust and appeared hours later, crawling up the side of a great hill miles away. Panchito was 11 years old, already a trooper with a rifle too heavy for him and a horse that they had to lift him on. His compadre was Victoriano, a veteran of 14. 7 others of the Tropa were under 17. And there was a sullen, Indian-faced woman riding side saddle who wore 2 cartridge belts. She rode with the hombres, slept with them in the cuartels. "Why are you fighting?" I asked her. She jerked her head toward the fierce figure of Julian Reyes. "Because he is," she answered. "He who stands under a good tree is sheltered by a good shade. A good rooster will crow in any chicken coop," capped Isidro. "The parrot is green all over," chimed in someone else. "Faces we see, but hearts we do not comprehend," said Jose sentimentally. "At noon we roped a steer and cut his throat, and because there was no time to build a fire, we ripped the meat from the carcass and ate it raw." "Oiga, mister," shouted Jose. "Do the United States soldiers eat raw meat?" I said I didn't think they did. "It is good for the hombres. In the campaign we have no time for anything but carne crudo. It makes us brave." By late afternoon, we had caught up with the coach and galloped with it down the dry arroyo and up through the other side, past the great Reboda cord and flanks the hacienda of La Zarca. Unlike La Mimbrera, the Casa Grande here stands on a level place, and the peons' houses in long rows at its flanks, and a flat desert barren of chaparral for 20 miles in front. Cheche Campa also paid a visit to La Zarca. A big house is a black and gaping ruin. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end this episode at that point. Yeah, we get a good look at all the traveling. But yeah, I wasn't trying to be a jackass when I say, when they're talking to the reporter, calling him Meester. That's literally what's in the book. Meestr. Because he's the one who's actually pointing out how they say Mr. And they tend to say Meester instead. But it's because if you listen to actual Spanish, if you know the language, the I is pronounced as an E. Its vowels A, E, I, O, U, or A, E, I, O, U. I took a couple years of Spanish. I at least know basic pronunciations. There goes the edge of those glasses again. Anyway, yeah. they treat him just like one of them, although one guy apparently was suspicious of him and thought they ought to just kill him. But yeah, and we get a couple times them singing songs along the way. But yeah. It's pretty interesting because we get a good look on the travel. We would now be. Is it? I think it would be the Sonoran Desert we'd be in at this point. Because I think it's the one in Mexico. But yeah, I believe it's the Sonoran Desert they're traveling through. The Haciendas. Remember, as we said at the beginning of the series, the Haciendas were often controlled by the rich and the powerful. But with everything that had broke out since the death of Porfirio Diaz and and the disappearance of his successor, you know, it wasn't really safe for the rich to own people at all. They shouldn't have been owning people at all, period, but there's points in human history where it's like, you're less than me, I have the right to own you. It's like, no, that's not how that works. But for them, it's like, that makes sense to me. What? Yeah. It's very similarly, very similar to the way, shoot, I can't remember the name of it. It was after U.S. slavery. It was still a form of slavery in itself. Yeah, the now free African Americans had land of their own, but they, because it originally it was land owned by someone else, they had to pay a bit of their crops and other stuff to the landowner. I cannot remember the name of that. It is an indentured servitude. What the? But yeah. And again, you can see in the story, he talks about it's like he almost looks down on some of the Mexicans. It's not intentional. You know, he's not, for him, he's not thinking he really is, but, you know, as we mentioned already, the Meester, well, that's how the I is pronounced in Spanish, is E. But, yeah. He also, where is that? Haciendo of El Centro, was it at that point? No, it might have been a different hacienda. Anyway, he sees this man who's running the hacienda, and he gives a description of him, and he says he's the definition of manhood, talks about him being light-skinned. You know, over 6 foot. And it's like, being light-skinned doesn't make you superior. All it means to me is he was somebody who had kept more of his Spanish blood than really had mixed into the population of indigenous Mexicans. But again, it's that period in time, you know, they feel they are superior if that's what he looks like. He's over 6 feet tall, slender, light-skinned. It's like, what does, yeah, how does that make him superior, though? Oh, there it is. The officers and I dined at the house of the administrador Don Jesus, the most beautiful specimen of manhood I have ever seen. He was much over 6 feet tall, slender, white-skinned, a pure Spanish type of the highest breed. So, remember, this is the early 1900s. We're still looking at some of the more disgusting practices in history. Were, I can't remember what the practice that I was going to talk about was called. But you essentially make assumptions based on individuals' race and claim this is what they tend to do more naturally, da 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 da. And that was a rather natural style of thinking. It wasn't necessarily that it was a rarity. One of the things you learn over history is a lot of stupid shit is thought, but society is supposed to learn and move on. But for some reason, we're going back to a lot of the stupid shit. It's like, no, idiots, we passed that already. We should be further ahead in class. I can't remember what that practice is called. But yeah, it was during this point in time. Anyway, this has been a long episode. If you've stayed with me till the end, I appreciate it. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.